I want to thank you all for coming here today, and I want to thank the Lions Club for inviting me here today. I think we live in the greatest nation in the entire world, and there's many reasons for that. One of them is, speaking here today, some countries, we wouldn't be able to gather here and talk about discourse of our government, complaints that we have about the government. So it's that kind of thing that we need to thank our lucky stars and the God above that we live in the United States of America so that we can have meetings like this. So I thank you all for being here. You should all give yourself a round of applause just for saying, hey, I want to make a difference. So another thing, that we live in a great state as well. In fact, not too long ago, I'd be arrested for walking into this restaurant with a gun on my side. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that carries a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson around on my side openly that you can see, but I thought it would be good for illustration purposes here.
Can we see it?
You can see it, sure.
What kind of gun is that?
It is a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. And if that bothers anybody, just be glad we're not speaking about swimsuits. So what we're here to talk about is basically our liberties, our freedoms, our rights as American citizens, our rights that were granted to us by God. And I think it would serve its best purpose is we started by talking about the Bill of Rights. So back in the 1780s, when they were coming up with a constitution, a lot of our founding fathers had a problem with what James Madison wrote. And the problem was, it did not include a Bill of Rights. In fact, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson both wrote letters to James Madison saying that they would not endorse the Constitution unless it had a Bill of Rights. See, the Bill of Rights serves one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to protect American citizens from the government. There's no other reason for a Bill of Rights, and that's why these founders wanted so badly for it to be in there, and thankfully they had the foresight to see the necessity of that. The government can't limit our speech, they can't limit our right to privacy or who we choose to worship, they can't hold you indefinitely without a speedy trial. The Bill of Rights also protects us for due process. We can't have punishment or our things taken away from us without due process. And the Bill of Rights protects our right to bear arms. In fact, the Second Amendment, which gives us the right or protects our right to bear arms, actually is the only amendment to use the word infringed. It shall not be infringed. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why the Second Amendment is so important that they had to choose those words. Before we get into that, I want to ask you, how many people here own a gun? So not too many. What are some of the uses? Just you shout them out. What are some of the things you use your gun for?
Protection.
Hunting.
Rabbit coyotes.
Rabbit coyotes. Okay. And someone said targets, snakes. There you go. So so we had hunting, self-protection, target practice, rabbit coyotes. These are all great things, but that's not the reason the Second Amendment exists. Those are byproducts, and those are great byproducts, whether it's protecting your home, protecting your person, your things. Those are byproducts of the real reason the Second Amendment exists, and that Second Amendment exists to defend against tyranny. Anybody ever heard that? Now, the people that argue against the Second Amendment, the people that want to take our guns from us, they say, well, what's a bunch of rednecks with AR-15s going to do when the Marines come marching down, or when a tank rolls up, or when an F-16 starts dropping bombs? And that is a valid argument. But what they leave out is the important part, the human factor. The human factor, when I say this, I'm talking about the troops themselves. Throughout our history, there's never been a single politician that signed on a dotted line that said guns are now illegal, because they knew that in order to make guns illegal, that means they would have to go door to door confiscating guns. And someone would have to do that. It's going to be the police. Well, the policemen live amongst us. They might be skeptical. They're going to have to use the Army, the National Guards, the Marines. They'd have to come to our houses. And the thought of shedding blood of fellow Americans doesn't sit well with our Marines, with our Army troops. There would be breaks in the ranks. There would be commanders that say, I'm not doing it. I'm not going into that stronghold. I'm not going into that section of Ocean Springs where everybody says they're not handing up their guns. There'd be breaks in the ranks, and it sounds like science fiction or some crazy movie scenario, but we actually saw it happen, not here in the United States, but in Israel, where the settlers were living on the Gaza Strip. They felt that it was their right to be there. They were told it was their right to be there. And then when they made a deal with Palestine, they sent the troops in to remove them because they weren't willing to go, because it was their right to be there. And the first wave of troops came in, along with the news media cameras right behind them, and there was bloodshed. They ended up hurting their fellow countrymen, their fellow patriots. And when the second wave came in to remove the settlers in Israel, they said, we're not going to do it. And they stood down. And there was a lot of political angst going on within the military at the time. And the best bet was to just back off. Now, can you imagine that happening in the United States? We're not talking about a couple of hundred settlers. We're talking about tens of millions of Americans armed with guns. So there would be that break in the ranks. And every politician, up until now it seems, knew that. And there's never been such a push to take our guns out of our pockets, or out of our hands, out of our homes and our cars, as there is today. Another argument that gun opposers have is that the founders didn't know that we'd have semi-automatic weapons. The founders didn't know that there would be a time that automatic weapons were available. Actually, that's not exactly the truth. The pocket gun, anybody heard of the pocket gun? The pocket gun existed in 1717, long before the Revolutionary War. And it wasn't today's machine gun, but it was an automatic weapon that fired multiple rounds of ammunition. They knew that technology was advancing. They knew that the guns would advance as the years advanced. And most importantly, and this is my favorite argument against that, most importantly, it doesn't matter what the technology was at the time. At the time, the government had the exact same weapons the civilians were able to get. And that is the way the founders saw it, because they knew that the civilians needed weapons to protect themselves against the government. So they didn't put restrictions on what types of weapons you could have back when they created the Constitution. The puckle gun, well, that's a funny name. You know what another name for the puckle gun was? The defense gun.
Spell that, spell it.
Puckle, P-U-C-K-L-E.
Like buckle, but with a P.
It was created by a lawyer in London in 1717. He called it the defense gun, but people started calling it the puckle gun because it was named after this attorney Puckle. And he called it the defense gun because he created it to defend himself and others against government. So that was the first automatic weapon, actually had that in mind. So lately, those who oppose guns have a different argument. They have a different strategy. They blame the guns. After every incident that happens, whether it's a mass shooting or anything that makes the news, they blame the AR-15, that mean-looking black rifle. And they start their push to ban the AR-15, and there's no reason anybody should have that type of weapon if they're only trying to kill a deer. How many deer hunters are here? Now, how many of you with your hands raised right now have a rifle that is much more powerful than an AR-15? Anybody have a semi-automatic deer rifle that is much more powerful than an AR-15? So they make this argument where they blame the gun itself. And the reason they do that, there's a strategy. Because if they go after our rights, they have to tell you, we're here to take your rights away. And that doesn't sit well. That's a bad marketing strategy. That doesn't sit well with anybody, whether they're on the left or the right. But when they blame a gun and say, this is the reason why society is bad, is because of this gun, this inanimate object. So they placed the blame on that. And the left started this, and the media trains right behind it with this. You know, even Ronald Reagan warned about this about 30 years ago. He said, we must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. That was Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. That's when the left started using this tactic of going after inanimate objects. And it happens today. In fact, yesterday, on the anniversary of 9/11, New York Times was pressured to take down a tweet on Twitter that said, 18 years ago, airplanes took aim at the World Trade Center. Airplanes did it, not Islamic terrorists. Airplanes did it, because it's softer that way. It doesn't offend anybody that way. Nobody could get excited about that, but people did get excited. Mostly people on the right got excited about it, and they got excited in a bad way, and they pressured them to take it down. And they do this exact same things with guns. After every innocent incident, there's a knee-jerk reaction. They blame the mean-looking AR-15, even when an AR-15 isn't even used. That's just what they know. Well, AR, it stands for assault rifle. No, it doesn't. How many people have heard that AR stands for assault rifle? It was actually named after the company that invented Armor-Light, is what AR actually stands for. And what is an assault rifle or an assault weapon anyway? I used to have this baseball bat beside my bed when I was in the military. We didn't have guns in the barracks, so I had a baseball bat just in case I needed it. And it was my assault baseball bat. What kind of gun is not an assault weapon? Anything that you can use as a weapon. This gavel is an assault gavel. Left uses the news media to vilify inanimate objects. And you know, the funny thing is, the sad thing is, a lot of our young people these days, they actually get their news from a lying media that tries to push their agenda on us, or memes, cartoons that were created by God knows who, that are shared on social media. And they're being told through these memes that AR-15s are bad and guns are bad. You know, I said the left earlier. I mentioned the left a couple of times. And it's because it's my job as the president of the Republican Club, yes. Not really. The left has traditionally been the party that the Democrats have traditionally gone after our gun rights, fought against our gun rights, or fought to have more gun control, to put it softer. But the push now is actually coming from both sides. And that is super scary to me. As a lifelong Republican, I am at dismay when I see Republicans calling for gun control, especially the type of gun control they're talking about in this day and age, because it is downright scary. We are heading on a slippery slope. So politics used to be you pick your issues and you support them accordingly, whether you were a citizen or you were somebody elected to Congress. You could see people crossing the aisles all the time, but today things are very different. We are in a very divisive world, especially this country. Today you pick a side. It's almost like we're rooting for a sports team, like a Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. You're not going to be like, well, I like the Red Sox, but that third baseman, he's got to go. You don't hear that in politics. You don't hear that in sports. And you don't hear it in politics now. And that needs to change, especially when you have people from your own party that are saying things that you don't agree with. And I'll give you a case in point. I've been a Donald Trump supporter for most of my life. I grew up reading about him and learning about him and liking what he was doing. I was a big fan of his TV appearances in The Apprentice. And I wanted him to run for president for a long time. And when he did run for president, I campaigned for Donald Trump in 3 different states. And I still campaign for Donald Trump, and I will do it again in 2020. But that doesn't mean that I have to agree with every issue that Donald Trump presents. I remember when I was running for Congress, I would go to meetings like this and give speeches like this, and I would have 1 or 2 people come up to me and say, do you agree with Donald Trump? And I'd say, absolutely. About 90% of the issues, Donald Trump and I are like this. And most people understood that. But there were some people that said, well, then I can't vote for you. You're either all in or all out. So I named a couple of things that Donald Trump had said, and I said, well, do you like your guns? And this one particular man in Hancock County, he said, of course I do. And he said, I'm carrying one right now. He had a concealed weapon in his back, he showed me. And I said, well, you know, Donald Trump has pushed for red flag laws, which means they can confiscate your weapons. You know what he said? No, he didn't. And he walked away. He said, I won't be voting for you. Okay. I also told him the guy that I was running against was against open carry. He said, no, he's not. He's Republican.
Potato fries.
So I think the point is we have to look at our politicians not just as an R or a D or an I, but we have to look at the issues. And when we take issue with something that they have said that we don't agree with, that isn't right for our country, that isn't right for our state, we have to make our voices heard. So like I said, I am a Donald Trump fan, but in 2018 when he said, I like taking the guns early, anybody remember when he said that? He said, I like taking the guns early. This sparked fears that Donald Trump was going to start showing support for red flag laws. And he made no mention back then of red flag laws. But recently that's changed. Now, what are red flag laws? Has anybody here heard of a red flag law? Show of hands. Anybody not heard of red flag laws? Okay, a couple of people. So I'll tell you what that is for those that don't really know what they are. Red flag law is often called gun protection laws or gun protection restraining orders. It's an ex parte decision to confiscate guns by a judge at a hearing that you're not at. Ex parte means you're not there, or one party is not there. There's no due process. There's no trial. A friend or a family member or a coworker can fill out a form that says, this guy expresses iffy behavior. This guy says things that I don't like. This guy could be off his rocker. And they sign the form and they submit it to the DA's office. The DA's office sends it over to a judge. And in California, where they have red flag laws, the state has them, they've had them for many years. California, according to last week's LA Times, nearly 100% of those forms get rubber stamped by a judge. Without a hearing, without anybody saying anything, he just flips through them, stamps it, flips through, and stamps it. What does that mean? That means that whoever was the target of that form, that piece of paper, they're gonna get a visit by the police to take their guns away from them. They don't even know they're coming. In fact, there's no advance notice given at all. You don't know that this form was even filled out. The LA Times said last week in San Diego, 200 people had their guns confiscated. 200. And they were bragging about it like it was a good thing. 200 people that had no idea that the police were on their way to their house showed up to confiscate their guns. So after the two mass shootings that happened this summer, the president did mention the words red flag laws for the first time. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, was on board right away, within days. Said that he was penning a bill that would give incentives to states that pass red flag laws. And that means money. They would give money in the form of grants or incentives. Ivanka Trump, the president's daughter, began a telemarketing campaign calling members of Congress from both sides of the aisle, saying that they should get on board with red flag laws. And if that didn't raise enough eyebrows, about 2 weeks later, Trump's tweet did. Chris Cuomo, remember the video of Chris Cuomo? Chris Cuomo is a CNN news anchor. He has a show every weekday night on CNN.
Former lawyer.
Former lawyer. The right doesn't like Chris Cuomo, and they make fun of him a lot. In fact, one of the things they make fun of him, they call him Fredo from The Godfather. Fredo is known as the black sheep of the family, which kind of perfectly describes Chris Cuomo. Chris Cuomo's father, brother, governors. He went the news media direction. So he kind of gets teased a little bit by the right on that. But apparently he takes it very personally, and a couple of guys came up to him in a restaurant. He was there with his son and called him Fredo and got him on video, getting very upset about it. He said a few cuss words, told the guys to get out of his face, leave him alone. And it went viral on the internet, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. A few days later, Donald Trump tweeted about the video saying that this is why red flag laws are needed, and suggested that Cuomo lose his gun rights for getting angry at a couple of strangers for interrupting his dinner. Now, I am no fan of Chris Cuomo or CNN for that matter, but I certainly don't think that getting into an argument is reason to lose one of your basic rights that are protected by the United States Constitution, and in particular, the Bill of Rights and the Second Amendments. So that got me to kind of move forward and go after the people that I know and kind of get them on board and start talking to our elected leaders to make sure that they're not on board with this. And the message that I gave to my folks when they talk to our elected leaders or our elected representatives is to say, look, you can still be on board with Donald Trump. You can still be on board with the agenda of Donald Trump and not agree with 100% of it. And we urge these people to go to their elected officials and urge them to not vote for red flag laws. Now, our Mississippi legislators have been really silent on the issue, both at the state and federal level, and we tried to change that. And although I have my flaws with Stephen Palazzo, I ran against him. I do applaud Stephen Palazzo. I don't know if it was the pressure or if it was something that he had planned to do, but after bombarding him with Facebook posts and emails and telephone calls, he finally went on WLOX last week and said that he does oppose red flag laws. Now this is a hard topic for politicians, because who remembers the last couple of election seasons, memes and advertisements on Facebook that say, I voted with Donald Trump 99.75% of the time. Anybody ever seen those? Well, voting against his wishes of red flag gun laws might throw a wrench in that little advertising technique. But I think it's important that we push these people to at least speak out on it, and especially vote on it. 17 states right now have individual red flag laws of some kind. And there's several federal bills that are being introduced in Washington. And now is the time that we need to start exercising our First Amendment rights to protect our Second Amendment rights. First Amendment being our freedom of speech. We need to pick up the phones. We need to write emails. We need to bombard Facebook pages of our politicians that we elect and make sure that they are on board with preserving the protections in the Bill of Rights. And if you need talking points, the NRA's Dana Loesch actually made a great post just this morning. She called it 10 reasons you should oppose red flag laws. And I want to talk about those 10 reasons that she posted this morning. Number one, and this was actually kind of convenient because Dana helped me write my speech this morning. Thank you, Dana. Number one, red flag laws are an inversion of innocent until proven guilty. With red flag laws, you are not innocent until proven guilty. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. In the United States, we grew up thinking that we are innocent until proven guilty, and that is not the case with red flag laws. With red flag laws, you are innocent until someone writes that you're not on a piece of paper. What other laws can we be punished for? What other reasons can we be punished for by writing something down?
Brian, did you define red flag laws for us? Because I've got people asking on Facebook.
Sure, yeah.
One more time.
So red flag laws, again, are laws that certain states have passed, and there are certain people in the federal government that would like to pass federal red flag laws that allow a person, whether it be a coworker, a friend, or a family member, to fill out a form and say, I don't like this guy's behavior, I don't like this guy's attitude, I think it's possible that he might do something bad. Submit this form to the DA's office, and a judge rubber stamps it, and there you have your gun rights taken away. So number 2 on her list was no way of defending yourself because the hearings are held without your knowing. That's that ex parte that we talked about. You don't know that somebody filled out a form saying that you were a bad person. You don't know that a judge is about to rubber stamp or sign or hear from the DA about what a bad person you are. This happens without your knowledge. Number 3, she said the time varies until you actually get your day in court. So that can be 7 days, 14 days, 24 days. In California, it's upwards of 1 year, according to the LA Times last week. 1 year before you can get your day in court. And as more and more of these red flag forms start getting filled out, as more and more states pass these laws, well, that's just going to bog down the court system. And it could be years before you get your day in court. The 4 states with the oldest red flag laws, those are California, Connecticut, Indiana, and Washington, they report that there has been no decrease in crime whatsoever. Nothing to show that red flag laws have been working. It's just a reason to take our rights away. There's no advance notice, number 5. And Dana points to an incident that happened just a couple of weeks ago in Maryland, which has red flag laws. Somebody filed one on a man. He didn't know about it. It got signed by a judge. And about 4:30 in the morning, before the sun came up, in the middle of the night, people started pounding on his door. So what does he do? He comes to the door with a gun in his hand. Because it's 4:30 in the morning and he was sleeping. And he was shot dead by police officers that were there to confiscate the gun. Now there might have been a tussle. There might have been something that happened, but those police shouldn't have been there in the first place. This man broke no laws. This man was exercising his Second Amendment rights. But somebody wrote on a piece of paper that he might commit a crime. You know, they made a movie about that one time with Tom Cruise, about people getting arrested for crimes they had yet to commit.
Right.
And it was so far-fetched, it was considered science fiction. And here we are today. That science fiction is actually coming into reality. Number 6, Dana says, unlike being arrested, no lawyer is appointed to you. So when you get arrested for a crime, they read you your Miranda rights. And if you cannot afford a lawyer, one will be appointed for you. Not the case when you are guilty after somebody signs a form. No lawyer is appointed to you. So in order to get your property back and your rights that are protected by the Bill of Rights, you have to hire an attorney out of your own pocket with no way of ever receiving compensation for that money. And she points to a man in Florida named Jonathan Carpenter. Jonathan Carpenter was a man with no rap sheet, a man that's never broken the law, or never been caught breaking the law. He was an upstanding citizen. But he shared the same name as another guy who was a drug dealer in his town. Somebody filed a red flag form on him. Police took away his guns, confiscated all his guns, and he has spent tens of thousands of dollars in attorney fees to get those guns and his rights, his God-given rights back. No charges are filed. No charges are filed against you. You're not being arrested. You're just having someone knock on your door and say, we're taking your property that you are allowed to have. But now that somebody filled out a form, you're no longer allowed to have it. So in essence, you're not being arrested, your guns are being arrested. Because the bad guns could commit crime later. Number 8, she says storage of the guns will become costly as red flag laws either become federal or more states enact them and more people know about them. Anybody that you have a grudge against, political foe, coworker you don't like, a brother-in-law that pisses you off, fill out a red flag form against them. Next thing you know, police are coming to get your guns. Police are coming to get tens of thousands of guns. Where are they going to store them? And you know when police put drugs in a locker, sometimes a little bit here and there disappears. What if they're storing tens of thousands of guns? So the police are actually worried about the storage and safety of these guns, as they should. Number 9, she says, the erosion of our Constitution, the 5th and 14th Amendment, guarantee us due process. We can't be punished, imprisoned, or have our things taken away from us according to the 5th and 14th Amendment, which protects our rights to due process. Red flag laws throw that out the window. No due process. Number 10, confiscation happens without providing any evidence whatsoever. In order to be convicted of a crime, there has to be evidence at a trial. Here it's just, I think this guy looks crazy. I think this guy was saying things that I don't agree with. We are in such a divisive country right now that how many people from the left would be doing it to the right and the right would be doing it to the left. How many coworkers do you have that you argue politics with? How many neighbors, friends that you argue politics? And sometimes it gets heated. Well, what's to stop somebody from filling out an online form after they have a Facebook argument with you? They don't like what you said on Facebook. So they have your guns confiscated and then they laugh about it. That's what this is coming to. That's what red flag laws, again, are going to do in our society. And I'll say it again, we must speak out, we must call our elected officials. We must stop the knee-jerk reactions. If we didn't learn anything after 9/11, when are we ever going to learn? After 9/11, that gave us the Patriot Act. It just chipped away at our freedoms, our right to privacy. We found out the government started spying on us heavily. And we had both Republicans and Democrats voting for this. This is what we call knee-jerk reactions, where people are forced to do things because of pressure from the loudmouths. Walmart, just last week, put out an initiative saying that they're asking their customers not to open carry, even in states and places where it's legal, in their stores. And they do it because they're anti-gun? Well, they've been selling guns for years, for as long as I've been alive. They've been selling ammunition as long as I've been alive. Walmart traditionally is not an anti-gun establishment. But the left and the people that were coming after our guns were speaking so loud, they were yelling so loud, and calling for boycotts of Walmart, that Walmart felt like they had to do a knee-jerk reaction. We need to stop these knee-jerk reactions. We need to stop especially our politicians from doing knee-jerk reactions. After the shootings, we get called for gun laws. After 9/11, it was, we need to protect ourselves against the terrorists, so we have to give up some rights so that we're protected against terrorists. And now we have to give up our rights to protect ourselves against some people that might do some bad things. And it's time we held those people responsible, and that we give law enforcement the tools they need to stop lawbreakers from getting their hands on guns, to stop felons that have been convicted that are no longer have their gun rights, to keep those guns away from dangerous people, but not like this. We need due process, we need courts, we need a jury of our peers to tell us that we are bad people, not a form that someone can fill out on the internet. So I'm going to close today by saying it again. We need to exercise our First Amendment rights to save our Second Amendment rights. Thank you very much.